Today's edition of the Spot Track podcast is presented by Bettor Edge. Visit bettoredge.com right now. Use code SPOTTRACK, SPOTRAC, at registration for $20 on the house. Start cranking out those Super Bowl bets. The bye week is here. The offseason is here for 30 of the 32 teams. We are fully loaded on SpotTrack.com, including all 32 offseason pieces now available. We're going to detail two of those in the next couple of minutes here, and we will do our Seahawks Patriots Super Bowl / offseason futures probably this coming Thursday, along with whatever else comes down the pipeline. But Rams, Broncos, and some interesting baseball. That's next with Dan Soemann. All right, Dan, welcome to Super Bowl bye week. Plenty of time for us to dive into all the ins and outs, the ups and downs. We're going to flip the offseason mode here as we've been doing for really the past few weeks. Let's start with the Rams. That was easily the better of the two games. I think the best team won. I think the best overall roster in the Seattle Seahawks is entering Super Bowl 60 as they should be. We'll talk about them a little bit more down the line, but let's focus on the Rams here, who do have one of the more interesting resumes that I had to put together here. This was 31 of 32 in terms of my offseason pieces. So I'm kind of running on fumes here a little bit, but this team sort of reinvigorated me a little bit. Because of the bells and whistles that come with them. They are arguably the second best team in the NFC. I don't think anybody can argue that too much here. They're going to walk now into the offseason with around $60 million of cap space. Let's call it 50 after their practice squad players are re-signed. They've got 11 draft picks, including 2 first-rounders because of the wonderful Atlanta Falcons situation that we've been monitoring for the past couple of months. They've got a quarterback, I think. I'm gonna let you speak to that quickly here off the top. And the free agents are somewhat notable, but certainly not daunting when you put this whole resume together. And then we'll talk about maybe the biggest element of their offseason, which is the extension situation, in just a few moments. But let's get to Stafford off the top here. Sounds like a much different version of this time last year, where he was very, very questionable. There was some family stuff. There was a lot to it. McVay was offering up retirement possibilities at that point in time. Seems like everybody is at least dialed in for 2026. Is that your read as well?
Yeah, I'm on board with that. Yep.
Okay. So now I flip the switch and put you into hot stove mode, which is what you love on a Monday morning. He's got a 1 for 40. It becomes fully protected early in March. Are we good there, or is he going to have to sweeten that pot again?
Well, I guess I don't know the answer to that. Like in terms of how it gets done, but I mean, I have no doubt it gets done. Whether that's in the like realistically, how long does he want to keep playing, and what does that look like from a restructured contract standpoint? I guess I defer to you on where you think this will go.
It's not nothing, because they absolutely do not have the next quarterback in-house right now. They just don't. Stetson Bennett's been an absolute zero. Garoppolo barely touched the field. And I don't think McVay wants any part of starting Garoppolo on a regular basis. And also, he's a pending free agent. So I don't think there's a situation where, the next iteration of the Los Angeles Rams is upon us. You bring up a fascinating point, because a lot of people are going to look to the $40 million salary and say, what happens? Basically, every offseason, Stafford has sort of, come to the table and said, what can we do about this? He's going to win an MVP. Okay. That's a whole nother layer to this apple. I don't know what we do with this. He looks damn good, but I have a feeling that behind the scenes, he's getting worked on quite a bit on a week-to-week basis to kind of prop himself up and make sure he's as impactful as he can be. My guess is the Rams bump this out a little bit, maybe a 2-year extension this year and next year guaranteed, just because, like I said, they're not walking through that door with the next Rams quarterback at least in tow. But I'm going to put this back on you as well, because we're just speculating here on Stafford. And I can tell you right now, he's worth about $50 a year. He's the second best value quarterback in 2025, according to our true value stat. It's Drake May 1 on a rookie contract and Matthew Stafford at $42 million a year as the number 2 best value on our system. So that just goes to show you what he did, at 37 and change in 2025, and probably what he can give you again in 2026 if all things go well, especially with this roster largely in tow on the offensive side of the ball. So I'm going to put this back to you. They've got 2 first-round picks. It's a weird draft. Do you think they're looking for their quarterback of the future in 2026 in April?
I don't think so. Especially if they're confident that Stafford's coming back, I think they could even trade down and kick one of those, try and kick one of those to the following season,
Sure.
where it might be a better quarterback draft. So I'm not sure they'll go that route, but
Here's what the Rams have
it's a
always
reasonable.
been. Yeah, here's what Les Snead and those Rams have always been. They have always been in the moment. Always. It is always about what is our current iteration? What is our current situation? How can we make this current roster better? What can we do about our financials in the current interim? Which is why Stafford feels comfortable on a yearly basis saying, can I get a little more out of you right now? I'm going to win an MVP. He's felt comfortable. The Rams have never made that uncomfortable. I think the only back and forth that happened last offseason is this guy actually healthy enough to play 18 weeks of football? Because the back was not in a good place this time last season. And it took a minute for everybody to kind of come to terms on where things were going to be. And obviously it worked out for all parties here. So I don't think we're going to have that conversation to that degree this time around. But I'm with you. It's more likely they punt on that second first round pick than take it. And that means they're going to look to load up on 26, 27 assets even more. They're going to have a couple of holes on the right side of the offensive line. Probably a full rebuild on this secondary would be my big priority for this team. And we've got Stafford. That means nothing else matters right now is kind of the mindset for the McVay Les Snead situation. And oh, by the way, the Seattle Seahawks might be the best comp for how the Rams are going to operate over the next 3 years, right? We're going to run this thing into the ground and maximize the current year, the present. And when it all falls apart, we'll go find a veteran and plug and play him. And hopefully he can become the next version of Sam Darnold, because that storyline is not going away. Okay, the Baker Mayfields, the Sam Darnolds, the Daniel Jones of the world, they aren't going away. And in fact, I think it's a trend that many of these teams at the top are going to rely on to resuscitate and keep their current rosters flowing, versus the obviously better value of going back to the draft and finding a rookie quarterback, but the less chance of having sustained success. We're seeing 1 year wonders out of the Jaden Daniels and to some degree out of the Drake Mays, but I don't think anybody thinks that betting on that from a sustained level with a veteran roster is the move right now. So I just wonder if the Rams think there's going to be somebody sitting there for us to poach, whether it's us giving up draft picks via trade, whether us being sort of savvy in free agency. My guess is they're just not super concerned about it, even though, the writing's on the wall with Stafford and his career here. Let's flip the switch quickly to the meat and potatoes of this Rams offseason, which is the extension situation. There's a lot of players on this roster to like. And in fact, I really struggled to find bubble candidates on this roster to the degree of where I put Matthew Stafford as a bubble candidate, just because I guess there's a world where he would have won that game yesterday, wins the Super Bowl. And then you have to think he's strongly considering retiring at that point. MVP, 2 Super Bowls, walk away and have a good life with my family. But I don't think there's any real threat of that happening right now. So I really struggled to find holes in this roster outside of what the free agents are going to give up here. Puka's the big name, maybe the biggest name this offseason that we're going to see. I was trying to do the math on some of this stuff, because I've done everything from extension candidates to fifth-year option situations to obviously pending free agents. I think there's a world, Dan, where Puka Nacua gets the biggest contract of the entire offseason. Now, you want to tell me Lamar gets redone in Baltimore? I can get there. I don't think CJ Stroud's getting a contract. I don't think Bryce Young's getting a contract. I don't think Daniel Jones is getting a maximized contract this offseason. And I'll say the same about Sam Darnold right now, although that could easily change over the course of the next couple of weeks. I think there's a world where Puka Nacua has the biggest guarantees numbers in 2026 in terms of a new contract. Tell me why that's incorrect.
I don't have any no pushback.
Is there any kind of reservation to the style of play he is? Because he's going to get hurt every year, right? I mean, he's just throwing himself out there to the wind for the sake of making every single catch humanly possible and getting every extra yard humanly possible. But the Rams just don't think about that kind of stuff, right? They operate as we put these players out there because of who they are, and we'll pay them for who they are as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you don't leave a Ferrari in the garage because you're afraid to get bird poop on it or something, So I don't. I mean, he's a super well-rounded player. Went from fifth round pick to what he is now. Obviously, I don't need to go over the accolades, but I mean, great run blocker, etc. It's not even like you're sitting there saying, but if he was better in this area, he's like
No way.
almost like your ideal wide receiver in every aspect. So
One of
yeah,
the biggest
give him
draft
the money.
misses we've had in a while, right? I mean, the Purdy stuff is certainly out there. And we get a bunch of players on the defensive side of the ball every year that kind of percolate out of the fourth round and become like superstar secondary pieces. We don't really see weapons like this go that late and then become generational. And that is what Puka is here. And I'm going to follow up with this question. Is he on the same line as Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson? Is he slightly above them because of his athleticism? Where is this guy right now in the real and fantasy oeuvre of the wide receiver world?
Well, I mean, from a fantasy perspective, he's certain. I mean, his per game rate stats are insane. So I mean, of course, he's in that. He's right in that tier, or if not leading that tier. But he's a totally. I mean, I don't think of them as the same style. It's just crazy how Puka like leans into the physical aspect of the game instead of like being more of a finesse player. He's super well rounded in all aspects. So it's from a fantasy perspective definitely similar, but not necessarily style in my opinion.
Yeah, I've got JSN more aligned with Chase and Jefferson. There's a world where CeeDee Lamb is somewhat in the Puka conversation. CeeDee takes a hitter and can kind of withstand some things, but he is a little bit of a one of one when you put the whole package together, because he is sort of seeking contact. He's not looking to be athletic at times in terms of speed and things like that. He's looking for, get me in the zone, find me somebody to hit, and I'm going to get 11 extra yards versus I'm looking to see what's available to me. So there's a different mindset, I think, when you put a player like this on the field, and it really fits the Stafford, the McVay, the whole model, that the whole personality of the Los Angeles Rams could not be a better fit for Puka Nacua. I could not think of a player that is going to get extended faster this offseason than Nacua. It is such a slam dunk fit. Now, you want to talk about semantics of guarantees and things like that. I guess we could sit, have a little back and forth conversation, but there's just not going to be a bigger rush to get this guy under contract for 4 or 5 more years than Nacua. And we'll finish on the numbers. Unfortunately, we don't have comps for this guy. You know what I mean? He's in a different tier, both from a production standpoint and obviously from a monetary standpoint. So even when you throw the names we've mentioned into the algorithm, you're just not getting enough bang for buck with what the math spits out. So, the math tells us $38 million a year. Okay. Which is great. But obviously the Chases and the Lambs of the world have eclipsed 40, Jefferson as well. And when you talk about guarantees and the climate and the current cap situation, which is going to rise to at least 300, probably more this season, I think I'm walking into that room if I'm Puka in that agency and I'm talking about 45 a year here. And I don't think that's underselling anything or overselling anybody. It's just where we are right now. I'm a 1-1 weapon in this league. I'm the right age. You had incredible value on my 5th round contract, right? So it just 1 + 1 + 1 equals, give me the largest offensive non-quarterback contract in the history of football, and we'll go from there. And I don't think the Rams can blink at that. Do you think that's overselling things a little bit here?
No, I assume I default to that. I mean, if there's a reason they wouldn't want to do this, it's mostly just like if there's uncertainty at the quarterback position going forward, do you want to put like the receiver before long-term stability at the quarterback position? Like maybe that would be a cause for hesitancy, but otherwise, yeah, I'm on board with everything you just said.
It's the rare scenario with that point, Dan, where I'm putting the cart before the horse, where Puka Nacua, his ability to separate, his ability to catch bad passes, right? His ability to sort of overcome and account for mistakes or bad decisions or late decisions is the perfect recipe for a young quarterback if that's the route the Rams go in 2-3 years here. So to me, he is he is medicine for the next quarterback. He is not an overpay or a bloated contract that could come with whatever the next version of this Rams system looks like. He's the kind of guy you want there for whoever steps in next, you know?
For sure. Unless there's, part of all of this is the Sean McVay ability to scheme him open in ways that his talent works. So I guess the Stafford plus McVay long term.
Yeah.
I mean, I only say that because we hear McVay kind of be ominous every year in terms of his future going forward. So, if the Rams had some reason to think that that whole package might not be there in the near future, but I see that's a very long shot in my opinion. I'm just putting that.
And they don't grow Staffords on trees, but I find it really fascinating. One of the more fascinating scenarios we've had in the past decade, that McVay was so dead set that Matthew Stafford was exactly the quarterback that he needed for his system and his offense. And they went through heaven and hell to get him, obviously. Having the mindset that McVay is that clear cut, that he is that present in what he needs, don't you think they're just going to do this again? And if they have to forfeit an entire draft arsenal to get whoever that player is, they're just going to do it. It seems like one of the easier paths forward, that Sean McVay is so dialed in to the type of quarterback that he needs to properly get his offense clicking, that he's just going to find it, whatever that is. Maybe that is a rookie. Maybe that is somebody that they're going to give up a draft to select. Maybe it is somebody currently rostered elsewhere right now that they're going to start, poking at, and eventually they'll figure out the right plan to make that all happen. But I just don't have any concerns. To me, the only concern is McVay going to coach for 10 more years? Right. And that might not happen. There may be a world where he is on the same wavelength as Matthew Stafford here, and they both walk off together. And I don't think anybody can argue that happening. It would be a bummer for the football community, but that's the only concern I have is this system actually going to be in place when the next version of the Rams comes around, and that's obviously TBD. All right, a couple more extensions quickly. There's some defensive youngsters that have really taken steps forward. Byron Young. By the way, none of these guys are top 10 picks here. These guys have developed into the system because of what the Rams are. A third rounder out of Tennessee, had a big breakout year again in 2025 here with 12 sacks. Look, these guys don't generally go from 0 to 100 like this. We see some nice seasons, but this guy has 20 some sacks. He's a run stopping machine. He's everything you want on that edge in terms of being flexible and compatible. He's a $36 million player in our system. I don't know that the Rams can go there with, Jared Verse and his contract coming up in 2027. Obviously, the Stafford situation might need a little bit of help financially this year. The Puka contract is going to be all world, and then we'll go from there. But I don't know. This one seems like it might have to wait a minute, and we'll see if Byron Young and his agency, Clarity Football, want to allow for that waiting to happen. He's walking into a contract year. He's going to get a nice escalator up to about $6 million. We'll see what happens here, but it's a big number for a player that is largely unknown to the rest of the NFL community. If you don't follow the Rams closely, he's just kind of come out of nowhere, despite the fact he's had great production. And the same goes for IDL Kobe Turner here, who came out of Wake Forest, that big NFL powerhouse, as a third rounder. And again, is just dominating from that interior out with 24 sacks, an unbelievable run stopping grade in PFF right now, and kind of just doing God's work on the interior, something that every team seeks out. And they pulled this guy out of the third round 3 years ago. He's a $25 million per year IDL right now in our system. It's a 4 for 100 on the extension based on the projection. So if the Rams are feeling themselves and they have an awareness that McVay and some of these coaches, obviously Shule on the defensive side of the ball, are going to be here for a bit, I don't see why they don't have a massively expensive offseason to lock these players in and keep this gravy train rolling. But again, a lot of unknowns at the top of this food chain with both Stafford and McVay, and we'll see how that trickles down from here. Any thoughts on the Rams heading into 2026, or are they just one of the top NFC teams, if not the top NFC team on your list?
Yeah, not much to add. But I expect them to be right in the thick of it again next year.
I'll give you a couple of parting thoughts here. They gave Tutu Atwell 1 for 10, like a minute into free agency, which made us all go, what in the hell is happening with the Rams? It was a bust. It never worked out for them, and it didn't make them skip a beat. That is, having followed some of these teams that have absolutely no production out of their wide receivers, and then having the ability to give a guy 10 million, give you nothing for it, and basically not even matter to your roster. That's a big David and Goliath type situation. Davante Adams is heading into a second year of his 2-year contract here. He's not showing any age, but he did have that hamstring situation. You know that stuff's going to rear its ugly head at this stage of these wide receivers' careers. Is that still a potent 1-2 punch, or do you expect some sort of wide receiver boost from this team this offseason?
I think they're just going to run it back. I mean, I would push back a little bit that he is starting to show his age, in my opinion, other than the goal line stuff is the goal line stuff.
Yeah, he's a red zone guy, right? Exactly.
Yeah, he's totally dominant down there. And then you see Puka take over everywhere else on the field. They do have 2 rookies that made an impact most of the year. One of those, Xavier Smith, in impact last night specifically. But you'd think that they want to get those guys involved. I know Tyler Higbee's a pending free agent, but they still have
– they're loaded.
They still have and utilize a number of tight ends in that offense. So maybe they add around the fringes, but I don't really expect any major turnover with Adams or a major upgrade anywhere in that receiving corps, other than maybe a draft pick again. But
yeah, and to that effect, Kobe Parkinson is a contract year player. He's on a 147 right now, heading into his age 27 season. He is obviously one of Stafford's go-to guys here. So if the plan is to lock in Stafford for a couple more years here, and I think that has a pretty good chance of happening, I wouldn't blink an eye if they do the same thing with Parkinson and push him out 2-3 years here, because Higbee's going to walk in free agency and they're going to want to keep that 1-2 punch available. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a veteran wide receiver add here. I'm not talking George Pickens or even Juwan Jennings, anyone to that effect, but
right,
somebody in their higher 20 stages of their career that can just be sort of a platoon player for Davante Adams, so that he doesn't have to give you 800 snaps throughout the regular season, something he's not willing to do probably right now physically. So it's a pretty damn nice situation for the semifinalist team in the NFC, right? To be walking into $60 million of cap space, 11 draft picks, 2 first rounders, a good quarterback contract, as long as they can kind of stay in tow and stay within this price range. And, just young players that are going to keep good contracts for the next 3 to 4 years. It's the stability and the consistency is desirable across the league. Let's put it that way. They have built quite a heck of a resume here and a heck of a portfolio to go along with a heck of a lot of winning. So it's one of those teams a lot of other teams are starting to look at or have been looking at and really want to follow in those footsteps. Let's flip the switch here to it couldn't be a more different situation, which is the Denver Broncos, who basically had to turn this thing over in a minute and a half under Sean Payton's tutelage. And a lot of it was self-induced, right? A lot of it was Sean Payton coming in saying, look, this is all good and gravy, but we're not going to have Russell Wilson here anymore. And in making that decision outward and out loud, by the way, they've taken a lot of heat. They've taken a lot of financial heat, obviously a lot of heat from the media, and they have persevered at a level that we just haven't seen in this league. In a hard salary cap league, to be able to do what they're doing is pretty incredible work. And it came with a lot of internal decisions, some really strong drafting, and the ability to overpay and maybe pay when they didn't want to on an offensive line that is, look, it's had its cracks in the holes. Everybody's had the cracks in the armors at the times of their offensive line, but they have really put the work into their trenches, on both sides of the ball, and it's expensive. And that kind of stuff still works. It still works in December, and it still works in January, and it damn near found them a way to the Super Bowl here on the heels of one of the most expensive dead cap seasons we've seen in football. So I give them a lot of credit for the aggressiveness to understand that the system had to change. And along with that comes financial purge and obviously some damage. But now they're going to walk into 2026 a heck of a lot healthier. Not great, All right. We've got them at about 35 million of space. Once their practice squad players are signed, that'll dwindle down into the, higher teens, most likely, assuming they bring most of those players back. They do have 9 draft picks. There's 2 4th rounders and a bunch of comp picks at the back end of it. They do have some free agents as well. Okay. They've got a couple of defensive players that I think played well this year, specifically the linebackers, Alex Singleton, Justin Sternad, and a running game that I'm going to defer to you, but I don't think RJ Harvey's an every down back right now, as we've seen him in 2025. So I would expect some sort of some sort of addition to the running game in 2026. Maybe one of these notable free agents we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. Your thoughts on the team we just saw getting to this damn near getting to the Super Bowl, and where things are looking for 2026 with these Denver Broncos?
Yeah, that seems to be. I mean, it's hard when you spend a high draft pick on RJ Harvey to sit here and say right away 1 year later that he's not an every down back. But they definitely need a downhill runner like J.K. Dobbins, who was out with an injury, but next year will probably need to be replaced. And I think that's kind of where they'll attack.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the defense is incredible. I guess you could ask questions if you really think Bo Nix is like the long-term quarterback, but that's not to say that they would make a move there next year. I'm just saying as this all plays out. Otherwise, I mean, where else would you be focused on,
Yeah, I really struggled to find necessities with this roster. A couple of bubble candidates. Evan Engram just didn't work out. There's a slight $5 million salary guarantee. Maybe they can find a trade partner who wants to take on basically that $5 million and convert the rest and go from there. But that's just a guy that, the resuscitation just didn't work. And he kind of fell by the wayside from that offense quickly. There's a little bit of depth at cornerback position, obviously with Surtain under contract now. I think they could probably find a trade partner for some of their younger players. And then, extension wise, you're going to see some conversation about them getting a little younger at that offensive line. I'd buyer beware on that a little bit because, Bo Nix is going to need as much experience and as much depth as possible up there. But look, they could throw a couple of draft picks at that and quickly patch that together as long as they do their homework properly. And then the other player of note I mentioned here is Marvin Mims, who, obviously the return game's there. He's becoming more and more of a gadget player in that offense as well. And Sean Payton loves that. He loves his trick plays at times. So I would expect that they bump out a couple years extension-wise on Marvin Mims just to have him as the versatile player that he is along for this ride a couple more years. It won't break the bank. I've got it at about $6-7 million a year. I don't think that's too damaging to anybody's front office, especially with limited necessity to in terms of extensions and free agencies to bring back here. So, we're talking about Bo Nix entering year 3 in 2026. It's a big year, both from the extension standpoint and I think for his stability standpoint, as you're mentioning. This is Sean Payton. He's not going to wait. He's just not. He's not going to sit here and wait for Bo Nix to develop. He doesn't have time for it. He doesn't think the league allows for that kind of timing anymore. If Nix is average in 2026, I think there's a conversation to be had about what's next for Denver at that position, because Payton has proved to be one of the more aggressive, operations of football in all of the NFL here. And it's a good conversation to at least have, despite the fact that I thought Nix was good, got better, did a lot of things right, checked a lot of boxes in 2025, but ultimately he's not available for them at the end here. And that certainly showed at the fourth quarter of that Patriots game for sure. It's a pretty simple offseason if they want it though. And they could simply just run this thing back, further develop some of these young players, maybe make a trade or two to bolster some depth and go from there. They've been uberly aggressive in extending their internal players. Last offseason, through the season, they had a couple of interior extensions, and they're just not shy. They're not shy in the field, as we saw with some of those fourth down calls, and they're not shy when it comes to their finances either. So I do expect some sort of fireworks in free agency, but what happens remains to be seen, and it's sort of your guess is as good as ours at this point in time.
Agreed.
You ready to talk some baseball?
Let's do it.
Okay. I didn't see this one coming, Dan, and I wonder if you did, because it is your neck of the woods. But your Cleveland Guardians extended Jose Ramirez to essentially a 4-year, $106 million extension, even though it's kind of a rip-up start over at 7 for $175. We've got the full details, but before we get to some of the numbers, just your thoughts on how this happened, why this happened, and what this means for the Cleveland Guardians going forward.
Well, I mean, it just sounds like both sides had interest in locking up him being locked up through the rest of his career. I mean, there were 3 years left on the deal. There were starting to be some like questions on whether Cleveland is going to be spending promises made from his last contract that they would be spending by now. So there were just some concerns in rumblings starting. If he would eventually ask for a trade out of Cleveland, it sounds like he just simply wants to be there, values the comfort, values staying with one team his whole career. It's pretty obvious he's left a bunch of money on the table, but as we've alluded to in previous podcasts, that there are certain players that value that, or that are willing to sacrifice a little bit of money for long-term stability, whether that's in the form of simply money or money plus term on your contract. So
yeah, he's done a couple of things here, in my opinion. He's guaranteed himself a statue, which, it sounds like fodder, but we just don't have many of these stories anymore. The guy who, comes up from the kind of nowhere and develops through one system and stays with that system throughout his illustrious career, which is what Jose Ramirez has had, by the way. I'm sure you're all aware of him, but maybe you're not aware of just how damn consistently good and at how high of a level he's been playing at basically every season. Every single season, this guy is top 10 in MVP voting. Mostly, he's top 5 in MVP voting. He's been one of the most stable third basemen in the league, American or national. He has been one of the most consistent hitters in the league, American or national. And he has represented the city of Cleveland about as well as any player has, any athlete has, not named LeBron James. And you can probably argue that one as well. So the statue's coming, even if the World Series never does. So that's not for nothing, because I think he understands how important it is to have at least one focal point on a small market roster like this for a fan base that is hungry, has an appetite, and at least wants something to be able to hang on to and a jersey to buy or a jersey to look at every single year. That has been him. And he's been one of the best soldiers in Major League Baseball, one of the best representations of that. And this is the other part you're not going to hear enough of, and you will hear because we're a money site. It's not small market to give a 36-year-old 4 for 100. And that's what's happened here. Okay, they are handing Jose Ramirez $25 million a year at age 36, 37, 38, and 39. That's not normal for the Cleveland Guardians. It's not normal for a small market team. It is a massive gesture, and it is back pay. There's no other way to say it, Dan. This is back pay for the value that you've mentioned he's been giving them over the course of the last 2 extensions, maybe even 3. And furthermore, and probably because of what we're saying, there's a significant amount of deferred money here, which is brand new to this Cleveland organization. This is not normal. It's to the effect of $70 million. It's going to lower the tax salary significantly down to about 22 and change. And it's obviously going to allow Cleveland to be able to have a little bit more spending power over the course of the next few years, though that might be laughable in the grand scheme of things based on how things have gone this year and over the course of the past few seasons. Your thoughts on the deferred compensation, and is that going to be a trend, or is this all a one-off for Cleveland? And then speak to this lack of spending from Cleveland here a little bit, because I know there's some frustrated fans out there. It's obviously tying into the whole frustration with the league, which is the top has gotten richer, the bottom has stayed sort of dormant, and Cleveland's been largely in that conversation.
Yeah, so with the deferrals, I mean, it is totally new for Cleveland, and I haven't dug into it specifically yet, but I would assume it has something to do with minority owner David Blitzer, who has, I believe, is involved with the 76ers in the NBA.
Yeah. They're transitioning to the new ownership, right?
Exactly. So in 2028, he has a deal that he can take over majority ownership of the Cleveland Guardians from the Dolans, who, if you ask Cleveland people, are the reason they do not spend currently. David Blitzer is much more of seems much more of like a competitor rather than like worried about the bottom line. So people are hoping that spending increases leading up to and after he takes over majority ownership. So I don't have confirmation on this quite yet, but I would assume he was heavily involved with this happening. Also, in the short term, it does free them up to spend, if you will. Now, we'll get to that in a little bit, the spending part, but the deferrals are really creative too. I actually just got an update on this morning, how they're structured. We have it as 10 million over 7 years, but that actually stretches over a 16-year period. Basically, he earns 1 million deferred each year starting in 2036. So
A little
we'll have
Bobby
the number.
Bonilla-ish there.
Exactly. So essentially, he wanted to. It sounds like part of this was he wanted to lock up some like retirement money, if you will, too. Not that he hasn't made plenty of money, but he will basically get paid through age 58 now, some sort of payment to Jose Ramirez. So really interesting in terms of the history of Cleveland never doing this before, but what it potentially could mean in terms of spending going forward. So now in terms of spending, where does that go? I tend to think that we've seen Cleveland try and do this in the past, where they try and lock up their young core long term with a number of pre-arb extensions that get a good chunk of money guaranteed to the player, yet are typically seen as likely to be a value contract over the long term, aka like players like Emmanuel Clase. I know how that worked out in hindsight, but there's plenty of Jose Ramirez before that, Michael Brantley. You can just like go down the list. I would assume that they try and redirect any savings towards locking up some. They did Tanner Bybee last year. So I assume
they're a draft and develop program, Dan, and it's been largely successful. So you can't really knock them for it. But I think a lot of fans are asking for more. Is all.
Correct, right? So instead of directing that towards free agents, they do have one of the best farm systems in the game. I think you're going to see some of those guys get some playing time, and if they break into the league and are successful, I think you could see them trying to lock some of those young players up and then spend around the fridges in years going forward.
Okay. Well, here's to the next iteration of Cleveland management, at least throwing their hat in the ring for a couple of the free agent big fish every now and then, right? Because I do think this roster is one big bat away, at least starting 2026. And, maybe there's a chance for them to add something here late in the game. There's some availability out there sitting there, but most likely you're dead on. They're going to run the kids out there to start the first couple of months, figure out their deficiencies from there, and then use the trade deadline as a way to bring in valued contracts kind of halfway through and build around the fringes, as you mentioned, because obviously you've been watching this closely for the past 2 or 3 decades or so. So same old, and that includes Jose Ramirez, who is now going to stick with Cleveland basically until he's 40 years old and on the payroll until he's 58 years old. A new day in Cleveland, and maybe that'll be the start of something new elsewhere, but we shall see. Speaking of big money, let's finish in Detroit, stick in the AL Central. We talked about this a little bit. It's back in the news a little bit because I think we're approaching some of these arbitration cases actually going to court. And as you've noted a couple of times here, most of these don't go to court. Most of these will get dealt with on the side. There'll be some sort of middle point agreement, and the player will sign the 1-year contract and go from there. And sometimes those contracts have options for year 2 and things like that. So there's room for creativity here. I think what we can certainly say, based on some of the reporting done by the New York people and et cetera, is that Tarik Skubal is not going to be traded. The offers that have been out there from the Yankees and the Mets and what Detroit has countered with and asked for seem insurmountable. I mean, it sounds like the Mets were asked to basically throw in 4 of their top 5 prospects. The Yankees were asked to include Cam Schlitter, their big starting pitcher prospect who showed up big last year. I don't think we're going to get to that point for what essentially is a 10-month rental here in Skubal. And if you think that that's going to come with an extension built into it, you have not been following Scott Boras, who likes to take everything month to month and certainly year to year as well. So my guess is he sticks with Detroit at least in April. The July deadline is a whole nother conversation, but generally speaking, Dan, we don't see those players move then either. Generally speaking, if the team decides their superstar is staying for the last year, he's going to stay for the last year, and they will qualify and offer him and go from there and get as much bang for buck as possible out of this player. So that's my assessment, is that Tarik Skubal is going to return to Detroit and give them 33 starts and then walk into free agency in what can only be accounted as the Skubal year. It's going to be the Skubal winter. So we'll get there when we get there. But in terms of arbitration, he filed at 32. Detroit countered at 19. It's the biggest gap we've seen. And the 32 is the biggest offering we've ever seen. And in terms of starting pitching, I think 19 is the current limit. So there's a lot of tops and historics and things like that. Juan Soto's $31 million is the top ever arbitration salary handed out. Obviously, Skubal's looking to surpass that. Give us the ins and outs, the guts, and then your gut feeling on where this thing lands in the next couple of weeks with Skubal and the Tigers.
Well, I ultimately agree with you. I think he starts with the Tigers at least the beginning of the season. If they falter at all, it early on, they have to at least consider it, and leading up to the deadline. But as you say, a lot of teams do. If you're remotely in the race, which Detroit projects to be, a lot of teams would rather just take the comp pick that they'll receive once he signs with another team in free agency at that point. But
can I jump in quickly? Because did this team do enough this offseason to stay in contention? I've been really, really disappointed with them not at least being in contention for some of these big names. They brought back Torres, they brought back a couple of players, but this has not been a team that has looked like it's bolstered. And by the way, it's not been a team that knows they aren't going to pay Skubal next year and is using some of that money right now to sort of account for that. This is a team that just is standing in muddy water right now, in my opinion. Good, still fine. They're going to be competing for the division, but it seems like a roster that should have improved more this year, Dan.
Yeah, that's a totally accurate point. I should rephrase what I meant. They're competitors in the division. I don't think they're like serious contenders for the World Series by any means. It sounds like there are some revenue concerns here that like might be A, holding up any like free agent spending, but B, might cause them to reconsider the Skubal trade value thing if they do end up going to arbitration and Skubal wins his case and they have to pay him $32 million for 1 year. I mean, I think
there's that much concern for having to throw $30 million on the roster, huh?
Well, I don't want to commit to that, but I think it's at least a talking point that if this goes that way, that they would at least want to consider at what breaking point is it worth them to go a different direction if he's let's just say he will not be in Detroit long term. So
give us the nuts and bolts of this arbitration process for Skubal specifically, in terms of what the team offered, what the player offered, what that midpoint means, what it means that this is the final year of arbitration, all those kind of things, Dan.
Yeah, basically so they exchange salaries now. Now they'll go to a 3-person arbitration panel. Basically the two sides are arguing that they believe that the player is worth or not worth $1 above or below the midpoint, which is $25.5 million in this case. So essentially the case is he worth 25.5 and $1 or $1 less than that, right? So that they can't, arbitrators can't settle in the middle, so they will award one side or the other. Now, that doesn't mean that the two sides can't come to an agreement before that, before they actually go to an arbitration hearing. Now, typically in the past, we've talked about this a little bit before, but typically in the past, once teams exchange numbers, the players will have to then sign like a 1-and-1, which includes an option on the second year. Except these higher profile players, we have seen them still settle for a 1-year deal. As recently as last year, Kyle Tucker did that, where he exchanged numbers and then ended up settling a 1-year deal with the Cubs. That could, in theory, happen in this case, I would think. But it is Scott Boras. He is a once-in-a-lifetime pitcher headed to free agency in his final year. So there is some strategy here from the Boris side. I think, taking into account the potential revenue aspect with the Tigers, the impending possible trade potential. Like, there's so many interesting factors here to see how this plays out going forward. Now, a little bit on the numbers too. Juan Soto, you said 31 million last year. I think the 32 number is a nod to that. He would top Soto there. He would be the highest pitcher. You're right, with 19. It was David Price well over a decade ago. So essentially, the Tigers are saying they're just under. He's basically, with inflation and everything, just a tad bit lesser of a pitcher than David Price was over a decade ago. But
which is absolute poppycock.
Yeah.
Because, if you've read anything, watched anything, seen anything regarding Tarik Skubal, and I'm going to bring it back to one of our initial conversations, it kind of feels like a Puka, right? This is sort of like a 1-1. He's just in a different tier right now. And I realize he's one injury away from being, lopped back in with the other starting pitchers who can only give you 30 starts and then have to miss 2 years with an arm injury. But until that happens, and I would never root for that, this guy is standing alone. He is in Pedro Martinez land right now. If you were, if you're old enough like us to have kind of watched that whole generation kind of build through, he's in that conversation, which is why I think he feels pretty damn comfortable about 25.5 million. And I can throw a little bit more context to that, because now that the dust has settled in free agency a little bit here and some of these extensions have hit, I did rerun Skubal's value in our system. And by the way, we base our arbitration numbers off of our market valuations, because it is the same process and there's a percentage based from it. You obviously have to truncate things based on what level of arbitration a player is at. But if you've heard Scott Boras talk about this, he's not referring to Tarik Skubal numbers in the realm of arbitration. He is talking about the overall worth of Tarik Skubal on a global level, because he's already thinking about December. He knows where this is headed, and he's going to squeeze every dollar out of Detroit before they push away from this guy at the very last second here. So Skubal's now a 41 million and change player in our system, okay, which is up there with Zach Wheeler's 3-year contract, right? And the difference being Skubal's going to look for 8 years, okay, at that 41 level, 40 million plus. And he's going to look to surpass the Garrett Cole contract and all these big deals that have been signed over the past couple of years. So if you just pull a percentage out of that, okay, it's pretty easy to get yourself to 24.5, 25 million with this final arbitration year. And that's not including the bells and the whistles. Okay. We don't increase a player's market value because they've won back-to-back Cy Youngs, but arbitration will. Okay. And every single adjudicator who looks at his resume will say, well, what about this thing? And what about this thing? And there are just certain elements that we don't have in our algorithm. Okay. That remains pretty standard for reasons. It's worked pretty well for us. So what I'm telling you is, on a base value, Tarik Skubal's a $25 million player in arbitration 3 in our system right now. So it should not be very hard to get him to 25 million, 25.5 and $1 when this court system hits. And I think it'll be fascinating, because I think there's a real chance, as we've discussed before, that this gets ugly. That if Detroit is cash strapped a little bit here, as you're kind of referring to, and that $32 million salary for 2026 is going to be painful to them, that they're going to fight like dogs to get that thing down to 19 million. And if that's the case, you're going to start seeing quotes coming through other reporters from Scott Boras saying, it's time, start making offers because we want the hell out of here. And it will be a nasty last couple of weeks as they head to spring training for all parties involved here. So look, we've referenced this. Detroit kind of shot themselves in the foot here a little bit with the extension offers they put out there, with the way they've sort of limped into this process. And now with the 19 million that they threw out there, you know what I mean? They've looked bad. It's going to help them with the midpoint a little bit here, but I'm fascinated by this one specifically. There's a couple arbitration cases that I think will go through the whole process. And generally we get 2 or 3 a year. But if this one gets to the courts, I think it could be really ugly. And I don't think anybody can argue that, right?
No, that it certainly has that potential.
Yep. Yeah. Does he win it? Generally, it's the team that wins. But does Skubal win here?
I mean, this is such a landmark case that I lean that his value is north of that, and I think the Boras and Co. I mean, let me put it this way: I think that they know that they're either going to win that case, or that this might prompt the Tigers to trade, move early, and get him to lock up some sort of extension a little bit early. I know I'm projecting a ton there, but it just seems strategic. Boris typically doesn't like to go to arbitration cases in the past. I mean, they will, of course. He's an agent, but it's time, assets, and resources that he doesn't want to dedicate towards scraping out, in the scheme of things, a couple extra mil here or there. But we'll see. Ultimately, this is like I just said, once in a generation player, if you will, from an arbitration standpoint.
Yeah.
In terms of like him even reaching this and being so successful up to this point, and now heading towards free agency.
Yeah, I just think the only argument I'd make is that if you are siding with the team here, you believe that 2026 Tarik Skubal is 20-something David Price, and that's just not right. It's just not right. I got one more element to throw at this, and I think it's pretty important. The CBA is set to expire December 1st, 2026. And I don't know if you've heard, but there's a heck of a lot of people that think the financial system in baseball is about to get ripped up and started over from scratch. And I believe that's going to include some sort of tweak to the deferral process. I'm not going to go as far to say there's going to be a salary cap or a floor or whatever the hell the lot of us have been sort of talking about here for the past 3 or 4 years. Certainly never been ramped up higher than it is right now. But I do think the deferred compensation process will get tweaked. That's been a big part of Boris's game here, a real big part, as he lands players in some of these higher markets and try to fit them into their massive, massive payrolls. If this all goes as we talked about here, and Skubal plays out 2026 in Detroit, and then walks into free agency, and that free agency is essentially gutted or completely put on pause because of this expiration and whatever else comes from that, most likely a work stoppage, and then some sort of completely brand new version of the CBA and maybe the financial structure. Is there a world where Skubal's value completely plummets because the system has changed and teams have to think differently about how they process these contracts?
I would be surprised. I would be surprised, but it's all valid.
Let me ask it differently then. Is there a part of Scott Boras that is actually going to consider an extension right now, whether it's with the Tigers or with a new team right now, because he has concerns about where the financial climate will be in December?
For sure. I think that's part of all of this is like, obviously I don't know where things are going to go post new agreement, whatever that looks like. But we saw this at the end of the last agreement where Corey Seager signed a little bit of an eye-popping deal, 10 for $325. This is the 2020. This is in 2021 before the 2022 agreement. Corey Seager, Marcus Semien, also 7 years, 175. That was an eye-popping deal. We've sort of seen this. We've seen a little bit of a few eyebrow-raising deals already this year with like Bellinger, all these veterans that couldn't find a deal last year, getting the number that they wanted and probably a little bit more than we ultimately thought they would get. I wonder how much of that is these players' agents trying to get in before that garage door closes next year. Now, they still have next offseason to do that. Even the qualifying offers too, we saw some of these players do that. So it's interesting to see how this is going to play out, and if people are eager to sign these big extensions again before the end of the CBA, December 1st, and what that looks like exactly. But the deferral process, that's an interesting aspect of all of this, how much that changes things, how much that does actually limit teams going forward. We both think that is the way it's going to go.
One more question then. One more angle to this.
Yeah.
I'm pretty positive Boris would like to get a deal done, and certainly right. Skubal. Do teams? Or do you think the Mets, the Dodgers, the Blue Jays, the big swingers right now, do you think that they understand where things are headed here, and they know that if it's 380 for Skubal right now, it's probably 280 in a year?
I mean, I don't know if it's 280 actually. I mean, some of these deals that, like the Juan Soto deal, the Ohtani deal, that had so much deferred money that it inflated the total value of the deal. Okay, I get that those might be unicorn deals going forward. I think the number is still largely going to be the number. It's just that their teams are going to have more restrictions on the deferred compensation structure that they can offer. Now, does that reduce the overall value a little bit? Yes, I'm sure it shaves off a little bit, but I'm not sure it's enough that they totally punt on it, if that makes sense. But
And if there's a salary cap,
I mean, I guess I'm
just trying to armchair GM this right now. I'm sitting here.
Right,
I'm Mark Shapiro right now. I'm sitting here as the Blue Jays front office guy, reading the breadcrumbs, understanding how the contracts are working right now, and thinking to myself, we may have to completely start our algorithm over from scratch in 12 months, because it's no longer about how to win over the agent. It is how do we win over the agent and also stay under this threshold? Because that's never been a thing in baseball. It's never been the process. Some teams have a threshold, obviously, but the big ones never have. And that's never shown itself more than the past 5 years with the deferred compensation, the $415 million payrolls that exist right now. But if they're capped, and Juan Soto at $51 million a year, which is what his tax salary is for the Mets, is going to be an albatross under a salary cap. Tarik Skubal can't be $40 million a year for some of these teams. He just can't. And I think that's what many baseball fans want. But I'm just trying to get to a point where maybe we can both agree that there will be a shift in how these contracts look. If some of these hammers do come down and the Mets can't give top AAVs and top term just to get a guy in their door, and same for the Blue Jays, and obviously same for the Dodgers. So I think it's what most people want. I'm not sure we'll get to that point. I do think we'll have small tweaks just so that the work stoppage doesn't happen in 2027. But there's a world where Tarik Skubal is the odd man out here, and that by waiting and by being where he is in a timeline, his $400 million contract right now becomes much less than that, because owners simply don't have to or won't be able to squeeze in that kind of number based on how this new financial structure exists. I just think it's fascinating that we finally got a pitcher worth a damn, worth the money, and it may be squeezed out in true baseball form because everything's about to change. We'll see.
Yeah, no, everything you laid out is potentially in range. I'm not going to act like I know one way or another.
And I'm not going to pretend like it's all going to change in one iteration. That would be ludicrous. It's why I'm my assumption is that the deferred stuff gets changed a little bit here and that we don't go too crazy. I'd love a floor, but the way I read it, Dan, is you'll never have a floor without a cap, and you'll never have a cap without a floor. To me, those two things have to exist together in some combination. And that's just a lot of work. It's a lot of change. It's a lot to deal with. So we'll have to see what it all gets to, but we got plenty of time for that. Good stuff on the baseball world. Plenty more to come. Some still notable guys that hanging out there in the balance. I know you're cranking on international signings, which is impacting some teams. And I think we're officially in arbitration season here too. So we'll be following those things closely as well.
Yeah, arbitration cases start today and run like the next 3 weeks, I believe. So we're going to start to hear some of those start to trickle in. And yeah, we have over 550 international signings now. Not the numbers for all the guys, but a good total.
A lot of them.
Good number.
Good work on that.
And we're trying to round up the totals, put that in the framework of the bonus pools these teams have, what they've traded for, what they might need to trade for, et cetera. So that's all on our international tracker on the website.
Yeah, and those salaries those signing bonuses don't hit the payroll or anything this year, but we are reflecting them on team pages so you can kind of keep track of who's doing what from the baseline and the international side of the world, because those players have been hitting rosters fairly quickly, especially the guys at the top of the list, as you'll note. So just another way to keep track of your team heading towards spring training and some homework, I guess. We're going to have to talk Seahawks and Patriots on Thursday if you're ready for that. So gas up your Sam Darnold / Drake May conversation, because we'll get to it on Thursday.
Oh, yeah. Can't wait.
Man, thanks.
Thanks.